Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I request that we settle and start our program now. It's 9 o'clock. Okay, thank you very much. According to the program, we are supposed to have a representative of the hotel who deals with occupational health and safety. I have requested that he come here 10 minutes past 9, just to afford little time to those who are not yet here. So within 10 minutes will make a difference. He will join us at 10 past 9. And in the meantime, we will move to our the third item of the program, which is welcome and purpose of the seminar by our acting director, Deputy Director General of Labour Market Policy and Industrial Relations, Mr. Tebiko Sikanbi. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sinobu. Colleagues, good morning. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you in this significant research seminar. At this point of the year, it is important also to point that this seminar that we are going to provide you as our important stakeholders the opportunity to engage with the result of the research that is well commissioned. As you would know, we've commissioned research and we've got the experts who've done the research. We'll be talking on those research here today. The important work was motivated by the new mandate of our department. As all of you would know, the Department of Labour was known as the Department of Labour, now it's known as the Department of Employment and Labour, with the addition of the employment section of the department. The mandate of employment, as we look back in the history of the Department of Labour, we agreed that the changes that it cannot be about labour without employment, because if it's labour without employment, labour will be unemployed. We are meeting here today, colleagues, with the latest unemployment rate of just 32% in the fourth quarter of 2023, as released by State South Africa. We are also mindful that unemployment is one of the three pandemics that we're facing in our country, together with poverty, inequality. These challenges make it necessary that we rethink what we need to do to tackle unemployment as a department. This department is also fully aware that by enhancing strategy to create employment in our economy, the other two challenges will self-solve if we deal with employment. Remember, the more people work, the more they are out of poverty, and inequality is also addressed on those bases. I say this, ladies and gentlemen, because if you can win and ensure jobs are created and ensure that they are decent jobs, will find no need to enforce the living wage and gainful employment. And it will obviously also affect the violent strikes that we normally have in our country when we deal with this issue. We will not have to enforce skill development for workers, and we will not have to enforce social dialogue in workplaces. With all these interventions that government made to eradicate unemployment, a lot of funds has been used to address youth unemployment in this country, and it continues to be. Yet unemployment seems to be deliberating against this reality. In particular, while our labour legislation is aimed at making the environment fertile for business to thrive and create jobs, we thought that it is not enough. Since unemployment is at its peak point, we wanted to give it the highest response by working with private sector, as I stated earlier, making the environment fertile for them to do business and create jobs. But our mandate does not allow us to stop there. Our other role is to create many other interventions that will fast-track entry into the employment and sustain that work with young people as a priority. The focus of the seminar today is basically to look at the many interventions that our government has made in trying to create employment opportunity for young people. We spoke them with one study delving deeper into those interventions that only create jobs, opportunities, and look at their success and challenges. The other study focused on all interventions aimed at skilling, employment, and business startup. As I said, the aim is to have a better understanding so that we can direct our focus on what works, so that we make it work even better, to direct our focus on that which did not work and draw the lesson to guide us as we start new interventions. As we all know that we're going to have election on the 29th of May and the 7th government will start, and this research and release of the research is coming at a very good time so that the new government will be able to adopt strategies looking backwards of what has happened, what we succeeded at and what we failed at, and what policies should we continue implementing. We are going to share with you an in-depth understanding of these two interrelated studies as conducted by the Human Science Research Council and the Nelson Mandela University. In particular, the researchers are going to share with you the finding as well as the recommendation of their assessment of government intervention in employment creation and retention to some extent. As such, I'm not going to get into the details of these research studies, but rather let the researchers play their specialized roles in doing that. I thank you.
I want to thank you, thank the acting DDG, Mr. Mkalipi, for that part of our program. And as I indicated initially, I postponed a little bit the issue of health and safety, and I will hand over to our colleague from the hotel to talk to us about that.
Morning and welcome to Fire Nice Mendon. You are currently located in conference room number 2. Straight out to the back, you will cross the passage and you will enter the emergency exit staircase, which will take you down to the side street. Alternatively, if the fire occurs that side or the emergency is there, you will exit here through behind the curtain on my left-hand side. The bathrooms is just down the passageway, the second entrance to your right. Lunch will be served in the restaurant, which is just past reception. The Wi-Fi is open, you can just connect to the conference domain, there is no password required. If there's any medical emergency, we do have first aiders on site, and the Pretoria East Hospital is 5 blocks to the east of the hotel. If there's anything else, you can just press the call button located at the back of the door, next to the door there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bianca, for that part of our program. And without waste of time, I will move on with the program, especially colleagues, because our senior management, the acting DG and the acting DDG are supposed to join the portfolio committee. Actually, they were not supposed to join us today. And we are very skip now to the fourth item of our program. We acting Director General, Ms. Onkem Jo, to the floor to give us the keynote address of today. We are all familiar with Onke. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes. I'm used to Onke. So. And it's very difficult for me to switch lately. Onke had been around the issue of employment and unemployment in the beginning when the skills development Act and the Skills Development Ladies Act were born. And on that note, I think she will have a good say in terms of what needs to be done to address unemployment. Over to you, teacher.
Thanks, Tenda. Good morning, colleagues. Dumelang, Sanbonani, Afsheni, Molweni, Khuyemore. Oh well, if they are French speaking, bonjour. But thank you very much, colleagues. I would like to welcome each and every one of you, from the researchers, demographers, statisticians, from the different institutions that will be sharing the information with us today, and the findings that have been derived from research that has been conducted by both HSRC and Nelson Mandela University. And at the same time, I would like to welcome all colleagues from all government institutions, departments, and from the Department of Employment and Labour Family, and all the colleagues that are here, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, as well as the colleagues that are joining us online. Those who are able to adapt, to change, would be able to thrive, even under the worst conditions. That is a quote, and unfortunately there is no source of the quote. But ladies and gentlemen, I use this quote because that is what we need to do the most. And I think it's what we've been doing actually in the past few years as South Africans and as global citizens across. It has been very difficult times. Times of economic meltdowns across the world, times of the pandemic, and times that have tested the labor market in a big way. And so these times have really become very important for us to actually rely on research and to rely on statistics in order for us to develop any strategies. So this platform and the continued work that is done by researchers is truly helping us in terms of us developing relevant plans and plans that are really talking on the ground in terms of exactly what is happening. Today, however, is that important day where we're going to then have studies that has been shared that actually talk and look at employment, quality of employment, opportunities created, programs and the impact of those programs. South Africa is about to complete its third decade as a new democracy. Consequently, the government endeavors to continue forcefully with mechanisms that bring fruits to democracy and to those who were previously marginalized and vulnerable. And as we know, with the hardships that came with COVID, 2 million South African citizens lost jobs. A very difficult moment where we know when jobs are lost, it's beyond the individual. It's actually the livelihoods of 10 or more people that are dependent on those 2 million. So when we look at the 2 million people that lose jobs, it's beyond that. We know that then livelihoods have been affected adversely. It has at times, at this time, our government has ushered many strategies and many interventions to try and cushion as much as possible employers and employees in these difficult times. But it has been very difficult for us to recover, considering the fact that the amount of time it is taking for economic recovery in our country and globally. And for us, therefore, to be able to provide these much needed interventions and jobs that can actually sustain those people that are currently unemployed, and that we actually have jobs that can be longer and that can be sustainable. So one of the biggest things that we truly depend on is the fact that the economy needs to truly grow, and when it is not growing at the margin that we would like it to grow, it therefore calls for government and the public sector to have so many interventions that are then important in terms of meeting private sector and business halfway in creating jobs. South African state is better positioned to take up leading roles in correcting some of the challenges in the market. However, the state cannot undertake this task on its own. It is important that this task must be done collectively with government, business, and all social partners in making sure that we come with meaningful interventions that can actually help with unemployment. We need jobs, and we need decent jobs, and we need better work, which can only become a reality. And that is what the first president of South Africa urged in his State of the Nation address in 1994. And he urged us to do as a nation to make sure that we empower the workers, we raise productivity levels and meet the skills needs of the modern economy. I think we strive and we continue to strive towards those objectives in the interventions and the work that we do at Employment Labour, in particular with this mandate of employment. But continuously we've done that since 1999, the invent of the Skills Development Act and the establishment of the Sector Education Training Authorities. However, key to these interventions has been actually measuring the impact so that we know that the interventions that we are making, how much of them are making a meaningful difference? How much are those placements making that difference? We are therefore here today in order for us to be looking at that. And that is why it is therefore important for us, when we have this focus, we use research and development to actually inform us all the way in making interventions. Such important work of research and development is key so that it gives us the guidelines in terms of what we need to be doing. I must say that labor market statistics have shown gains that we have made in the past have been eroded. With those interventions of skills development that we've had in the past, and with all the events and the activities and the changes that have happened, all of those have been somehow lost. Hence we have to put plans, and we put plans differently. We have to rely strongly on research so that the plans that we put in place actually give us opportunity to truly make meaningful interventions. While we work to make the economy grow and the private sector creates employment, we are forced as government and not to do the same way and to do the same things with the same approaches and strategies and expect to get a different answer. So in order for us to get different answers, we truly have to dig deep through our assessments, through our surveys, through our research, to make sure that when we put strategies, we truly do get different responses to it, so that jobs that we actually put in place can truly be sustained and not be eroded by occasions of very important and big events that take place, and events like pandemics, where we have recession and where we have job losses. We know currently we are experiencing job losses in many sectors, but in particular in the mining sector. So it therefore becomes important that researchers working with those sectors, we need to understand if we've run out of resources and that we're not going to be able to use those sectors as sectors to actually grow our economy, and also sectors to develop our people and provide long-term opportunities of employment. So we need research more and more when we look at where we are going forward, when we look where we are at currently. So employing research is therefore very important. What has become very clear from the economic and down is that we cannot place the well-being and the future of our people solely in the hands of the market forces. One of the realities is that we're also faced with climate change. As South Africans, we have witnessed challenges, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal in the past 2 years, and in the Eastern Cape and other provinces, where we have heard landslides and we've got, mudslides that have actually destroyed infrastructure and therefore closed down companies. So these are some of the factors that we need to be looking at and making sure that whatever we do in the market is actually matched with the changes that are taking place, so that we are able equally to manage our institutions, manage our strategies, manage our environment, so that it is sustained and we do not get ourselves to situations that, based on all the events and activities that happen through climate change, that we have to suffer so much. KwaZulu-Natal has suffered. In fact, to be very close from home, the Department of Employment and Labour, through its supported employment enterprises, SEE, we actually lost a factory because of these very adverse weather conditions. The Durban factory was lost 5 years ago, and losing that factory meant that livelihoods of people that worked there were lost. Production that we manufactured in that factory was lost. It is only now that we're actually getting that factory, and through the work and the support. So this is one aspect that is important in terms of us making sure that when we look at the environment and we look at the factors that affect jobs and placement, one of the other interventions that we have is making sure that young people that have been trained as artisans in TVET colleges are actually placed in apprenticeships and quality apprenticeships, so that when they complete their apprenticeships, they don't only finish their qualification, which is part of the requirement, but that also they are able to have opportunities in workplaces, so that when they are placed in from those TVET colleges by those institutions, they can be taken up, but besides being taken up, they can also have as much knowledge and experience which can help them to develop their own enterprises. So this work that we're doing with business as government is equally important in intervening in terms of employment. Therefore, researchers and developers, it will be helpful for us every time that we do those interventions, which we base on the works that we see from yourselves in terms of saying what interventions should be done and must be done in South Africa, that later on you help and assess the impact of those interventions to see how much of that has actually been sustainable, and if those interventions have truly employed strategies that are talking to meaningful development of young people and placement in work opportunities or in enterprise development. Working together is seen bearing fruits, therefore, in those many other areas. And we know that private-public partnerships, such as the TERS, which is the Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, has actually worked and has been a support and cushioned a lot of companies and as well as individuals, despite all the challenges that were experienced by that program. But it was able to pay out 68 billion, which then cushioned employers, and we did not have as much or more increased job losses, considering that we lost 2 million. I'm convinced that If we had not had that intervention, which actually saved and supported 3.2 million employees, I believe that we would have had more losses. So therefore, interventions of government with business and social partners is very important in us making sure that we keep employment and we reserve employment. One of our biggest strategies of TERS and normal TERS is making sure that we preserve jobs when it's difficult times. And we ought to continue with those strategies. However, those strategies, I call on researchers to also be looking at them to see how sustainable are they, and are they within the market? Are they, should they be growing in terms of the stipend, the approach that we are having in order to sustain? Because when we put the turnaround strategies through Productivity South Africa and put the TERS relief scheme through UIF, it is helping employers. But maybe should we be employing other strategies to make sure that we have more and more sustainable interventions? I do not want to take a lot of time laboring on this. I would leave the researchers to put together and share with us the outcomes of the research that they've done. But I'm also asking of them to look at these aspects and these strategies that we are having, so that when we continue employing these strategies, there's embedded research work that's being done that is advising us on how we continue going forward, or if we are on the right side and therefore remain the same. On that note then, I thank each and every one of you for attending this research platform. And I would also like to congratulate Tendani and her team. I know for years she's wanted to have this platform where she sits with like-minded researchers and institute, and they share research work that has been done and cultivated. We wish you everything of the best and hope that you will continue providing this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gigi. Let's give another round of applause, please. Thanks. I move now to the fifth item of our agenda, which is to introduce the research reports that brings us here together today. And those are the two research reports that were in our research agenda that was developed for 2019-2023. And one of them, which is key to employment creation, was for us to look at government interventions, as DG alluded to earlier. What is it that government has done? And in doing that, why are we continuing to see unemployment debilitating like this? It means that something that we are doing, we are not doing it right, probably. However, we didn't want to make assumptions and take things at face value. We wanted research to dig deeper in those interventions. And at the time that we were doing this research, one intervention, DG, was the TERS that came into place. And I think one of them did look at it slightly in terms of checking how it fared at the time that it was implemented. So those institutions that were mentioned, the HSRC, which is our Human Science Research Council, and the Nelson Mandela University were the two that helped us in conducting those two research projects. I just want to underline two things that DG said, that while we know why we are here, to look at interventions that government did, the funds that were used to save our population from unemployment. The thing that she's stressing on is about the impact of climate change. Yes, we were looking at interventions, DG. However, impact of climate change is like reversing the jobs that have been created. It's like we are moving in opposite direction. While we want government to assist private sector to create jobs. There's something that is taken out of that which has been created, and that is the climate change and the impact that is having seriously on jobs that are already created, which is something that we were not focusing on. We wanted to focus on creating new jobs, but it is an eye-opener to look also seriously on dealing with this that takes what we have created. The other important thing that I took out of your speech, DG, is the extent of the impact. I always thought of 2 million jobs. I never thought about how many people depend on Denani as a one job. And I'm assuming we should no longer talk about 2 million, but it's maybe 3 million or even 4 million people who are affected. Because we know ourselves as African, we are defined by the we. I cannot be without them. So the impact is severe, and it makes this job very, very, very serious. So on that note, colleagues, I wanted to introduce the two research as indicated. The difference between the research is that the HSRC one will go deeper into the different interventions, while the Nelson Mandela one looked only at those that are related to job creation. Related to job creation in the sense that what is it that government did to help young people to enter into employment. So we look at actual employment creating interventions, and the one that prepares them in terms of skilling them to get and become employable. That's what the Nelson Mandela University did. And we started by scoping the different interventions. There were so many, and then we grouped them in those different ways, and in Nelson Mandela Project, we decided to focus on the two. When it comes to the HSRC, they looked at everything, because everything matters in preparing us to be ready and to set a good environment for employment creation. On that note, colleagues, I just want to skip quickly to request the HSRC, Bongi and Shrini. Bongi and Shrini, I would like to request you to come to the fore, whoever is taking the first presentation. I'm moving quickly because we are going to release the DG and the acting DG, so that they just get maybe the prelude of what you are going to share with us before they leave. Thank you. Shrini, colleagues can assist Shrini to come to the floor. And I will request Delika to beam the presentation in the meantime.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. It gives us great pleasure as HSRC to be here with you and to share the results of the work that we did in partnership with the department from as early as 2021. While the technology is being sorted out, I'll just perhaps start by introducing. So the team that did the research is a team from the division called Equitable Economies and Education, and myself, Dr. Bongi Mwego, colleagues sitting over there with us, our researchers, as well as several other researchers who are not able to be here today or have been part of the study. So we're still waiting for the technology. I'm not going to, because of the interest of time, I'm going to just speak to some of the stuff and just to give you a broad overview of the presentation. So myself and my colleague Bongi will be sharing the presentation back and forth. Our overview of the presentation it's a very long presentation. I know it's a lot of times been allocated, but we don't want to, in a sense, bore you with information that many of you are very au fait with. So the first section of our presentation, in a sense, is to give you an overview of the trend analysis. What do we know about unemployment and the nuances of it? And a lot of this is what you know. So I'm going to skim through those, but the slides will be there. We've just hidden a lot of the background slides because it's historical and it's stuff that we all know. The second part of the presentation speaks to the framework, the conceptual and theoretical framework that informed the way in which the study was designed, implemented, and the data was analyzed. And we'll be speaking to the two frameworks that we've used, which is the school-to-work transition framework and the theory of change, both of which have informed the way in which the study has been implemented. So a brief overview of that. The third component of the study will then be talking to a very brief snapshot of the policy terrain. And as you heard from both the acting DG, the DG as well as from Tendani, the objective of this study was not to evaluate the individual programs, the myriads of individual programs that have been implemented, but rather to focus on were the policy interventions adopted since 1994, have they attempted to realize what was the intended outcome? So the policy evaluation, the policy appraisal is the focus of this, not the individual evaluations. And there are lots of studies out there that can tell you how well or how badly second chance matric or whatever has worked. We touch on that, but we're not going into the details. It's a huge report, it's got all the details there, and you'll be able to read that, and we will be producing an executive, a more popular summary, etc. So that's another another component of the study. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Bogi, who will then give you an overview of the methodology and some of the unique features of our methodology, informed by certain challenges that we actually encountered, COVID related but non-COVID related as well, and why the design therefore had to be in a particular way. And also what are some of the limitations of the data that we're presenting, but how we've mitigated against that, those challenges to present data which may have some limitations on inferentials across the whole population. They will have, we're declaring them up front, but they also are able to, because we've triangulated them with evidence that's known, both in South Africa, documented evidence, research evidence, etc. So we will be able to speak to that as well. And then we get to the heart of what is the data telling us. And so that'll be the bulk of the presentation. And then I'll come back at that point to speak specifically to the last section, which is what do we know about youth transitions into the labour market? Because that's the overarching question. What do we know, and therefore what are the summary findings and then the conclusions? Since we did the study and submitted the report, there have been other developments, and we took it upon ourselves to make sure that we've updated the report. So the version that you will get, because the World Bank's Human Development Report, for example, UNDP, was of 2022, after we had done most of the literature review work, etc. We found it was imperative, and what was really interesting was the alignment between the findings that we found together with what they found, and also the nuancing and enhancing of our findings with that. So it's been quite important to be able to link up with new developments, etc., and recognizing the world of work. You know, the results may look quite depressing, and we know it. We know what we're seeing in our statistics, but we also have a lot to celebrate, and we also have a lot to build on. And I think that's this message that we want to give. How do we take what we have, the good that we have, and build on it? And how do we root out the stuff that's not working for us? So that's by way of just an overview introduction for you of what the study will try and cover. Denika, I hope you're ready. Okay, so we're just waiting for that. All right, so look, I'm going to try and broadly, you'll see on the slides, but I'll start talking there in the interest of time. And just to say, what are we seeing in the youth trends? We're seeing pre-2010, we saw a really good growth trajectory for employment, and particularly youth employment. We saw the same trajectory for youth graduate employment. You know, you got the extent to which you got a job if you had a degree was higher. It was much lower if you didn't have, but you still, if you didn't have even matric, but you still could get into the labor market, even as unskilled labor. Post 2010, that trajectory has been a downward trajectory. We know that. And there are multiple factors that we're all very familiar with. The global economy opening up, the fact that, you know, multinationals are now able to move between countries, and the economy has exposed us to imports, etc., that have undermined our own industries, etc. All of these things are factors. But we also have to acknowledge that we have a youth population dividend. And sometimes people think about that as a curse, but it isn't. I mean, look at China with its population, and it has not, up till recently, in any way affected its growth potential. So, are we ready? Do you want to rather project directly from my laptop?
Can I put HDMI?
I'll have to put an adapter for that. Okay. Just bring my laptop. Thank you so much for the Getting it's charged, so you don't need to bring the charger. So do I see? Should I do it? Oh. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Apologies for that. So I think I'm giving you a kind of outline. I'm not going to repeat this, but it looks like a very long 180 slides, but believe me, we're not taking you through 180 slides. So the purpose of the study, I think Tendani really gave us a clear understanding of what the study objectives were. I'm not going to repeat that because she did help us to understand what the two studies were about specifically, and I elaborated on that just now as well. If you're measuring us against what the outputs are, you're looking at, have we identified policy interventions? Have we evaluated the impact? And those are the two important questions that you need to look at and intensively interrogate whether we have delivered on that. We're dealing with a wicked problem. It is youth unemployment is structural, endemic, has myriads of causes, and it includes low economic growth, low aggregate demand for labor, and skills mismatch, amongst others. And And our crisis amongst the 8 million unemployed is the need, not in education, employment or training. I'm not going to talk to definitions. I think we're familiar with those, etc. I'm not going to talk to unemployment. And we know about the expanded definition of unemployment as well. But again, I'm not going to talk to that. I'm talking to an audience here that's very familiar with all of this, probably more familiar than we are. I'm not going to go into details on the youth trends. There are lots of slides that give you details per sector, per age, per different demographic profiles, etc. Those differentiators are quite important, and I'll explain to you. But essentially, we're dealing with a population dividend, with a median age at the moment of young people at 27, and it was 23 in way back in the days of our early democracy. Fertility rates have decreased. We have very large numbers of young people in this 25 to 35 age group. Very small differentiator between in gender, and that's important because it's that 1% difference in gender population statistics, but much bigger differences in the outcomes of employment for men and women. So there's a challenge there. Black Africans, female and persons with disabilities have disproportionately high levels of unemployment in South Africa. And interestingly, discouraged job seekers reduced. There was an increase during the global financial crisis. Sorry, it's just 281%, it should say 28%. Apologies for that. What do we know about the trends? More young people are unemployed than older people. When I say adults, people over 35, although many of us would count ourselves as adults even at beyond their 20s. Few females are employed, between 9 and 17%, fewer than males. And disability prevalence is extremely high. I'm not going to go through the growth trajectory. I'm not going to cover all of this. This is just a summary of what we know about youth versus adult employment, what we know about gender employment. These are just trends, and I think we've covered those, and these give you some idea about the factors that have impacted on disability, and you'll see there the details like emotional, psychological support, etc. Education, access to education was often a footstep into the labour market. It's no longer the case. The media reports that we have 800 unemployed medical doctors in the country is an example of high levels of qualification but inability to access the labour market for a whole range of factors. But we have a problem also in education, in a sense, in certain sectors of our education, where large numbers are now having access to, through NSFAS, etc., into the educational system, into TVETs, into universities. Throughputs are much lower, considerably problematic at TVET level, and the throughputs are so actual performance and throughputs. But even when they have completed their qualifications, then access to the labour market, if you have a TVET qualification, is considerably lower, very low in some studies that we've conducted, the HSRC, as low as 25% if you've got a TVET qualification to get a job, compared to close up to 68 or even 90% if you have a qualification at NQF level 7 and above. The critical story here is that the dropout rates are higher at the lower quintiles. So our investments are not just in education generally, it's in targeting lower quintiles specifically. And that's not just about addressing pit latrines in those schools, etc., the infrastructure. It's about the quality of teaching, and it's access to quality education and training in those areas. Factors influencing school dropouts, these are fairly clear. Pregnancy, this is where the gender dimension comes in, insufficient school fees, the fee-free schools initiative has definitely helped, but we have significant percentage of our population living in urban areas, living as children of domestic workers and other kinds of workers who live in communities where fee-free schools is not an option, but for them transport is the easiest thing, and therefore they do not necessarily have access to for free, which is a considerable barrier. The mean incomes are lower. Look at the black line there, right? For youth compared to, see, this is figures up to 2017. The employment in industry, it's much more in the services, retail industry, much more in wholesale and community industries, etc., and a lot less in more high-tech industries. I don't think I'm going to go into detail by the different sectors, etc., except you can see that similar data here as well. Youth-owned businesses decreased by 4% between 2004 and 2008. But interestingly, in that same period, adult-owned businesses increased. So, what do we know about? So, this is the theoretical and conceptual frames that I was speaking to you about, etc. We know that youth employment policies are located within a basket of social policies that South Africa has driven since 1990. I mean, some of the first policies were within the first 100 days. We had school feeding schemes in schools across initiated, etc. So those redistributive policies can be broadly under the umbrella of social protection, but they include labor market interventions, social insurance interventions, and social assistance interventions. When we look at labor market interventions, we look at education and training, so all the access to the NSFAS and all the kinds of training programs that we implemented. The education awareness, the PES services, the employment services programs, but also the public employment programs, etc. So those are broadly the kinds of direct and indirect interventions that we've clustered all the policy interventions into. So the conceptual framework that has informed our study is the Nielsen framework. So Nielsen is a researcher who was concerned that the school-to-work transition research and evidence was largely from northern developed countries, was not linked to and located, situated within a developing country context like South Africa. And so his study was across more than 16 countries on the African continent to begin to understand what happens to enable transitions from school to work. And the statement is so clear. A bad start to a young person's life is an immediate, long and lasting economic, personal and social cost. No amount of matric upgrading classes or whatever is going to help that person to transition into a good quality matric if their basic grounding, right? Their basic schooling has been of poor quality, has disadvantaged them. So they're not doing maths and science, they're doing math literacy, they're not accessing practical education in scientific fields, etc., etc., etc. So there's a need for investing in education and training of quality to facilitate labor market access. A lack of entry into skilled occupations is also associated with a negative future into employment. So we know what we're seeing, including with all the dispensations that we have for wage dispensations that we have for agricultural workers, for domestic workers, etc. It's that minimum wage which leaves people floundering right at the bottom. Critical to understand the transitions is to look at the outcome of youth-focused policies, legislation, and programmatic interventions. How do these interventions contribute to longer or shorter transitions? What do I mean by that, longer and shorter transitions? So this framework, this diagram, helps you to understand that. What it's showing you is that there are internal and external factors that influence what happens in your life. And it's true for all of us. So the internal factors which security is living is common with the poor persons, including households which have to leave that seriously impact your ability to transition. They don't necessarily completely impede, but they impact. positively and negatively. Internal factors that are positive could be social networks. If you have a family member who's working strong external factors are the government internal process, certainly contribute to the sector. Previously marginalized, reached and excluded groups. And there are other kinds of policies. Then there are also negative, like macroeconomic policies. So those are the external things. So then when you go to, I don't think it's showing on the mouse here, but when you look at the transitions, and if you have not, so the research evidence is clear. If you have not, after your finished education, basically, got into a program that is a strong education training labor market program with support, if you don't have access to that, the likelihood of that young person not getting a satisfactory job ever, just staying in menial, unskilled labor for a very, very long time. In the work that we did in 2017 with the Department of Tourism, we found people 17 years later in that same job peeling potatoes in that job. That's the kind of poor transition, because no access to skills training, no trajectory of career pathing, etc. But when you do have access to these programs, which is the lower, where you do have school to work transition programs, etc., with exposure to youth programs, your likelihood of getting into the job market are stronger and shorter, more, no promises of how long the duration might be, but the greater likelihood that you'd have a shorter duration to be able to get to a successful employment outcome. So these factors are important, and these have helped us to analyze even what we found in our data here. I'm not going to go into detail about the policy frameworks, except to know that we know that since post-94, we produced a plethora of policies. We've done pretty well on that score in South Africa, across the whole range of course. We may not have done very well with implementing them. We may not have done very well with the design of some of those policies, because some of them have been gender neutral, gender blind, disability blind, okay? But we've got general ones, lots of generalization, not necessarily specificity, which deals with specific nuanced barriers to accessing these programs. But we have a lot. And that's why I was making the point earlier, saying we can build on what we have. We're not dealing with an empty nest, a basket of nothing. We're dealing with a world of experience, policies, programs, examples, where things have failed and where we've worked, where it's been successful. And the strong youth focus is there. It's in every SONA, it's in every policy, it's stated, and it's in every single APP with quotas. So again, I'm not going to talk to this, etc. As I've said, it's across myriads of policies, strategy documents, etc., constitutional provisions, and alignment with international development, sustainable development goals, and previous to that, Millennium Development Goals, priorities, etc. So we clustered the policy priorities that have been implemented across 5 broad areas. A whole lot of policies that have dealt with education and skills development. So the national skills development, the white paper on education, etc. And the programs that have emerged out of that, NSFAS, the education and training, the work of the TVETs, the CETAs, etc. becomes part of that. Focus on health and well-being of young people. The teenage pregnancy, the school health programs, children in conflict with the law, so diversion programs, subsistence programs, substance abuse programs, etc., etc., etc. So we have a lot of those programs. Economic transformation and participation. So we've got, things like the, employment tax incentives, the Employment Services Act, etc. Social cohesion. So the National Youth Service Policy, a culture, the YES programs, etc. A culture of community service as part of, and CWP and EPWP are part of social protection related measures. but developing responsive structures for youth development. So the National Youth Commission and National Youth Development, African Youth Charter, all of these have created a plethora of policies. And we could list every single policy here, but we haven't done that in this, but you'll see it in the report. But just to give you a sense of how holistic our policies have been in their specific silos. They've not been integrated in many, many instances. They don't cut across each other to see how they could be integrated. So what we find is that despite the policy focus, despite the program implementation, the National Treasury Report of 2017 and the National Planning Commission Report of 2020 both speak to millions, at least 4 million, and if not more, because we don't keep good statistics, have accessed many of these government programs. The spend is in its billions, and I'm not going to, the report speaks to that as well. Despite all of that, unemployment has worsened. And these are factors that have identified, aside from the macroeconomic factors, policy incongruency in targeting, means testing. So you're a household accessing child support grants and other kinds of benefits, but your household is also deemed to be so-called over the threshold, and so you can't get the NSFAS bursary, or your household can't get other kinds of support. So that policy incongruency. The lack of integration and coordination across the programs, that silo work, etc. The almost complete absence of monitoring and evaluating outcomes. What we do brilliantly, well, some programs do well, is APPs, monitoring, how many. So we're not asking so what. So what did that 500 people go through? What happened to them? We're not asking those questions. We're asking how many, we counting, how much did we do, how much did we spend, did we do it in the right time? That's fine, but we've moved several, at least a decade ago to outcomes-based programming and reporting, as DPME has required us to do, and that's where we're lacking. And so, interestingly, one of the comments that comes from the 25-year review is the presidency's acknowledging that we hop from policy to policy, a new policy introduced, etc., before we've fully implemented and evaluated an existing policy. Might be some good reasons for it, but have we evaluated that policy before we jump to a new policy? Have we even tested and used evidence to inform the new policy development? Okay, so again, this is the typology of active labor market programs, which includes both private sector and public sector investments, etc. I'm not going to talk to all of that again. I'm not talking to this slide, which is about all the different types of programs, and what are they dealing with? They're dealing with demand side issues around employment, let's create jobs, misalignment programs, replacement, etc., and supply side programs. And again, there are different types of interventions here. Both the Treasury report as well as the Planning Commission report gives you absolute details of the scale of some of the programs, but even there seem to be substantial gaps, because we know that, for example, local government implements programs, private sector implements, not all of which are captured in here. So one of the things that we did at the almost outset of the study was to present, to reconstruct a theory of change. Now, you're all familiar with the requirement from DPME of theories of change. It's from our experience of working in government departments, theories of change is something that we do because DPME asks us to do. We haven't seen enough focus and emphasis on understanding why this is important, who should be using theories of change, and how we should be using theories of change. So, theories of change are not theoretical, they're not there to sit in a box on some paper on the strategic plan. They are about using it to design your interventions, to plan for the implementation of those interventions, to monitor the implementation and to evaluate this. And that's about defining the indicators that you're going to track, unpacking the assumptions assumptions underlying certain design features, and then addressing or mitigating those design features should those design features become of challenge, etc. It's the reason we need theories because reality is too complex. I've used this example before because every single one of us who have children or family or relatives, etc., who we invest in their education, we have a theory of change. I'm going to spend money from birth, from good caregivers, etc., to preschools, to this, to that, because of what? The matric certificate? No, that's not where you stop. That's the output, matric certificate. But you want them to move on to creating their own jobs, getting a higher education certificate. That's the theory of change. And what's the end? The outcomes there, they've got a degree, they're getting a good job, they've created their own wonderful jobs, they are building good livelihoods for themselves, get married, have children, and have good outcomes for their children, and let their children have the same benefits. And the impact of that is skilled, capable workforce, unemployment levels that are at optimal, people who are food secure, livelihoods, well-being is enjoyed by everyone in the country. If today we were all to press forward that fast forward that button that says, I'm in 2050 and I'm trying to look back and tell people we implemented all these policies and look how wonderful South Africa is. That's what the theory of change helps us to dream about. But more importantly, we move beyond the dreaming to the actual saying, how will we get to achieving that dream? And that's what theories of change help us to do. And that's what the monitoring helps us. Because if we go a little bit off track on that road, we get help to put back. Not at the end of 5-year reviews, but every quarter, every 6 months, we look at, have we achieved certain things? If not, why not? What do we do? How do we change things? Etc. And that's what theories of change do. So basically, we look at this kind of. I'll skip this. But the theory of change asks the following questions: if I do this, then what will happen? And if I do that, what will happen? And if I do that, what will happen? Etc. And that story I said to you of the pathways. We talk about the pathways through which change happens. You invest money in a program, you invest personnel and skills and competencies from within the department to invest in research because you want to change certain things. The research then does what? It improves the design of certain programs, it implements new programs, etc. Then what? You recruit people to participate in those programs. Then what? Those people then become, they get their jobs, they get their qualifications and so on. Then what? They get better, they get incomes, they get promotions, they get to set up their own business. Then what? Etc. And that's the if-then logic of a theory of change. Pretty practical, actually. So this is an intervention log frame. And I want to point out to you the orange section is largely saying we focus mainly on the things that we have control over, right, which is the implementation of the program. What inputs, what activities will we implement, and what will be the outputs that we will report to the APP. That's the efficiency area of the work that we do. What we're not doing enough of is what difference has this made? What difference has this made? It's the same question that our CEO asked us in HSRC, and which is why we will not stop working with your department even though we don't have a contract. And that is because our work is measured by what difference did this report that we're giving you make to your work. Because if it's made no difference, and if we've not been able to help you to make the difference, then we failed on our work. And so that's how strongly we get evaluated. But this is the black hole that we're talking about, the yellow mustardy side of it. Black hole where we don't know what difference things have made. We've got some good studies that are starting to show us where things are working, where things are not working. But we don't have enough of a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation system that tells us about outcomes. I'm not going to go into details except to highlight for you that there is a theoretical framework for how you evaluate public policy systems. Policies don't appear in a vacuum, they work within a system. Political systems, economic systems, etc., they're within a vacuum. And within that, and that you need to work through that that reflective subsystem in order to develop the right kinds of policies. And sometimes we skip a few steps. We make assumptions about certain things, and because it's the flavor of the day and a politician is chasing after specific targets or whatever, right, we introduce new policies. We saw that when we suddenly had NSFAS being extended to large numbers of people, etc. It created havoc for our economy, right? It did expand access. Whether it expanded quality access is a big question. We don't necessarily see that. So those are the kinds of vacuums that sometimes policies develop in. So I'm not going to explain the purpose of public policy evaluations. They're fairly straightforward. And this study demonstrates why the investment in such an initiative has been, I think, one of the most important interventions that the department has invested in. There's a difference between policy evaluations and program evaluations. And I said that to you right at the outset. We're not evaluating each and every one of those individual programs. We're evaluating the policy and the policy intent and the policy outcomes. And again, I'm not going to talk to that, but we evaluate policy content, we evaluate policy evaluation, implementation, and policy outcomes. This study has predominantly focused on outcomes, but you will see the result. Some mentions of policy content, for example, on the ETI, or policy implementation, where we see multiple stakeholders implementing the policy, but in such diverse and non-standardized ways that actually the outcomes get lost or are diffused. The criteria for evaluating is internationally accepted criteria, and you'll see when we present the results that these 5 criteria are going to be our concluding statements about what did we find about the results. Do the programs the policies that are implemented, are they responsive to what we're seeing out on the ground there? Or is it just obscure policies that have been developed? Were they effective? Did we achieve the results that we wanted to achieve? Are they efficient? Are we spending the right amount of money, the right amount of resources? We're not duplicating, etc. What impact has the policy? What outcomes and impacts have that policy emerged? And how sustainable is it? So when you look at EPWP and you look at employment, you'll find that immediately that they stop being on EPWP, their income levels drop. It's not sustainable. They're not getting sustained income because the program is designed in a particular way. All right, so I'm going to hand over now to Bongi. You're going to come over here.
Good day, colleagues. So I will be taking over from Sherin. I'll take you through the research methods that we employed in the study. Just a few things, some of which Sherin has already alluded to, but I just want to bring to your attention the reference period of the study, that it was focused on policy interventions post 1994, and yeah, she's also taken you through the conceptual framework in detail, the Nielsen's framework, which kind of brings our attention to the number of factors that can influence how people transition, from the education sector to the labor market. And the study also represented a theory-based evaluation. She's also taken you through that, and the fact that we adopted a mixed methods. I'll go into that now. Okay. Okay, so to kick off, we started with an in-depth literature review just to get a sense of what's out there. So we did some analysis and reviews of the different policies, the different programs, just so that we can be able to now begin to classify the different programs and projects under the classification, the typology that Sharon shared with you. And then in addition, we had a big component of the beneficiary survey, the quantitative survey with the young people who had participated in the various programs that are meant to enhance their entry into the economy and the labor market. And then a bit of an exploration here, which researchers like doing. We conducted some focus groups. We did 8 visual focus groups. This was quite an experience for our team. We used what is called the Vidu data-free platform, which is quite nice because it allows respondents to participate on their end without incurring any data cost. So the focus groups were conducted with a purposefully selected sample of beneficiaries that had participated in the number of interventions. So our groups had, I remember one had youth without matric. We also had another one with youth with a TVET diploma. We also had others with those who had undergone entrepreneurship support. We had another focus group that was composed of unemployed youth, and the last one was youth with disabilities. So we also layered that with some key informant interviews that were conducted with a sample of sector experts and stakeholders, representing in diverse areas, policymakers, implementers, some were researchers, as well as academics working in the field. So we conducted about 14 of the key informant interviews. Okay, so the study, so this was a bit of a challenge and we had to be creative around this issue. So the study was basically implemented during the COVID period. And our key question was, where are the beneficiaries? They went through this training, but where are they? What are they doing? What are their labor market destinations? And our concern was that if we just went in and asked them, okay, are you employed? Are you unemployed? What's your labor market status? Whatever is going to come out is not going to be realistic. It's not going to be a true reflection of what really happened to them. So to get around this, we included retrospective data from the 3 points. So as you'll see, as I'll be taking you through a number of tables, you'll see they speak to these 3 points. Firstly, the outcomes after the beneficiary had completed an intervention. So we wanted to know, okay, so what happened after you completed that intervention? You were part of that program, so what happened afterwards? Then we also had a series of questions about the outcomes just before COVID. Okay, so what happened when you completed the training, intervention? Then what happened, where were you in 2018 and 2019? Then at the third level, we ask, okay, so where are you now? So those are 3 points. I know it can be a bit confusing, but again, just to say, we were worried that the findings will not be able to reflect the pre-COVID outcomes of policy interventions if we don't layer it that way. So we asked them, what happened after you completed the intervention? Okay, where were you in 2018 and 19? And then thirdly, now at the time of data collection, what are you doing? Okay, so lastly, I also just want to bring to your attention that the study also explored exposure to multiple intervention. So we are aware that there are people that, they finish the internship, they don't get a job, and if they are lucky, they also, move on and get another opportunity. So we also try to tap onto those dynamics. So in most instances, you'll see that we refer to the last intervention, so the most recent intervention. Okay, I'll skip through the terminology, but yeah, so these are just some of the terms that we are using throughout the presentation, and we thought just to avoid confusion, let's just cite them here, the interventions. It refers to the various education and training and employment programs that our respondents went through. And when we speak of the beneficiary, it's those who have participated in the particular program. So we're saying it's those who have been exposed to any of the interventions or programs. Then the non-beneficiaries, it's those that have not been exposed to any intervention, so they have not participated in any of these employment, training and employment programs. And then the most significant intervention is an intervention which had an impact on their labor market transition. As I've indicated, that we did recognize the fact that some people have been through a number of programs, and sometimes we'll ask about the most recent, sometimes we'll ask about, okay, which one do you think it was the most significant, to where you are, which really helped you to be able to smooth that transition to where you are currently. Okay, now we're getting on to it. In terms of our realized sample, just to give you a sense of the numbers that we're working in. Okay, so for this study, sorry about that. So for this study, the cooperation group was defined as all adults, people that are aged over 18 years, as of 1994, up to approximately 60 years of age. So those are the people who would have accessed the intervention implemented since democracy. I think we've run out of bed. Thank you. Okay, so another critical challenge that the study was confronted with is the fact that we did not have a comprehensive database of the study population. Okay, we'll keep swapping until we get the one that works. So we did not have a comprehensive database of all those that had participated in the program, arising from the policies that were introduced to enhance the labor market access. So to deal with this issue, again, we had to be a bit creative. And again, maybe I should just mention that another constraint on accessing the beneficiary registers of the program primarily also arose from the POPIA, which necessitated the study to identify an alternative approach for us to be able to construct the study population from our end, so that we can now begin to sample the youth to be able to target through our survey. So we recruited potential respondents via several platforms, including Harambe, including SA Youth Mobi platform, through our HSRC Facebook, through Twitter, social media accounts, and we sent out a number of targeted emails to institutions in the relevant sector, kind of inviting them and just sensitizing them about the study. So the recruitment advertisements were shared through these platforms with careful attention to the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the study population. So this is what we got at the end. We were able to recruit just over 11,000 potential participants, including those that have participated. Again, just to say, we were aware that some had participated in multiple program types, and from that, we were able to secure about 2,000, just over 2,000 interviews. So only 87 did not consent. So at the end, this is the numbers that we are working with. And you'll see that we try to split it by whether they were beneficiary, meaning they had participated in any of the education and training programs, or they were non-beneficiaries. So those are those that, as I indicated, were not exposed to any of the interventions. Okay, so this is indicated in the previous slide that we ended up with about 2,386 interviews, of which about 1,700 were exposed to the employment and education policy intervention, whilst almost 700 had not been exposed to any intervention. So the slide begins to provide you just a snapshot, just a summary of how the realized sample was constituted, and this is in terms of the main demographic characteristics. You'll see that, okay, I hope it's not too small. Yeah, I think it's readable. You can see that most respondents who participated in our survey at 72% were female. And the age profile revealed that the majority, 70% of the beneficiaries were aged between 20 and 29. And of those, 41% were aged between 25 and 29. Okay, another thing to note is that about 39% had achieved the matric, or a higher qualification. If you put all those percentages together, 57%, and Black Africans were in the majority. Okay, I think we've captured this to a large extent in the previous slide. What I had not spoken to is that only 2 respondents were non-South Africans. And in terms of the spatial location, the largest number of participants came from Gauteng at 26%, KZN as well as the Eastern Cape. And we had very few from the other provinces such as the Northwest, Free State, and the Western Cape. And we had very few, I think less than 2 of people that participated in the study had some form of a disability. Oh, sorry. I think it was not moving. Okay, so this is the one I was speaking to. Okay. Then again, in terms of age and gender, I'm not going to go to this one. I've already spoken to it. That was predominantly female. This is the provincial distribution. I've spoken to as well about Gauteng being the province where many of our participants came from. But it also makes sense because it's a province with the largest economy in the country.
I want us to pause at this point, take a break, come back and proceed with the presentation, and we will engage that presentation thereafter when they deal with the results. I request that we take a 30 minutes break. It is now 87 past 10. Let's add 30 to it and then we come back.